Hi, I'm Mrs. Ireland. I'd like to share a couple of books with your school, so that's what I'm doing. The book I'm going to read today is called Around America to Win the Vote. And why am I in a costume? It's not quite Halloween. Well, I'm in a costume to celebrate this, a centennial, 100 years. A centennial of women getting the right to vote. So I am dressed with this sash that says Votes for Women, my hat. I am a suffragist, from the word suffrage meaning right to vote. So the story I'm going to read today is about two women who went all the way across the country in their car with their kitty to convince men and women that women should have the right to vote too. So they believed in suffrage. They said, votes for women. So they're called suffragists. The author of this book knew about this story because it's a true story, because the women wrote letters, postcards, telegrams, journals, photographs, and even newspapers, articles that they put together like a puzzle, and then they figured out this is what happened in the story. So it's a true story. 100 years ago, a centennial time, well, women had a hard time convincing men. They had to do all kinds of things. They made buttons, they wrote songs, they marched in parades, they hung out big banners, and they drove across the country to convince people. Here we go. Around America to Win the Vote, two suffragists, a kitten, and 10,000 miles from New York to San Francisco and back. From the League of Women Voters, the group I'm with, celebrating the centennial of women's right to vote 100 years ago. Well, here we go. On April 6, 1916, a little yellow car set out from New York City. It was called the Saxon, and it was given to the women. It carried tools, spare parts, a teeny tiny typewriter, an itsy bitsy sewing machine, one stout leather trunk, which is in the back, bursting with useful things, and two smiling women. A wee little black kitten decided to come with them. They put a yellow ribbon tied around the neck. They thought it'd be a good way to convince people if they could take care of a kitty on their trip. The taller woman was Nell Richardson, and the smaller one was Alice Burke. And together they planned to go all the way across the country to convince women and men that all should have the right to vote. Votes for women, Alice told the reporters in all the small towns and cities they went to. Votes for women, Nell agreed. When I have read the story to students in other schools, when I would do this, they would also say, votes for women. So maybe you can remember to do that too. Pretend you're part of the crowd. Well, they said the typewriter and the sewing machine were all part of their plan, you see. If anyone said that women didn't have the brains to vote, well, Nell would just dash off a poem right then and there, asking them about their personality, and she would whip off the poem on her typewriter and prove that she could. If anyone said they should cook and sew and just stay home, women, leave the running of the nation to the men, Nell would whip up an apron on her sewing machine and give it away while Alice was giving her speech to prove that, well, women could do both things. And if the two of them could circle the whole United States, 10,000 bumpy, muddy, unmapped miles, facing danger and adventure all alone, with just each other and a kitten in their little yellow Saxon car, well, that would prove that women could do anything. So off they went. Well, the very next day they had their first adventure, and this was in the newspaper, and they read about how a horse pulling a wagon down a narrow road refused to let them pass. Votes for women, they cheered to the man, but he didn't move. Neither did the horse. So Nell got out of the car and went over and stroked the horse on its neck and calmed it down, said soothing words, and soon the horse moved over to the edge and the man decided to help them. Then they kept going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Remember, small towns, big cities? They stood on their seats and spoke to the great city crowd. They didn't even have to write a poem on a typewriter or sew on their sewing machine. This time the crowd cheered. Some gave them money to help pay for gas along the way. The next morning, however, oh my gosh, it was a storm. Snow came down. It was coming down so thick it made big drifts. It was windy and they could hardly see in their headlights. You know what that is called? Starts with a B. A big snowstorm is called a blizzard. If you said that, you were right. In through that swirling snow, they got to Baltimore, where they had a big party for them, and more people gave them money for food and for gas. Well, they didn't go to gas stations off of freeways. They went to people's homes like farms or country stores and bought the gas. The next day they stopped for gas. A crowd of men clustered around the little yellow car. Alice hopped on the seat to give her speech. Did the men listen? No, they stared at her car instead. So Nell said, let's open up the hood and see inside. And the men all crowded around her. And she showed them all the parts of the engine and the spark plugs and explained how the engine works with the crank in the front. Votes for women, the men cheered to the women at the end as they drove away, and they smiled and looked at each other. Well, after a quick trip to Washington, D.C., the capital, they came upon the bumpiest and muddiest road yet after a big rainstorm. The little yellow car went bump, squelch, and finally just got stuck, and they couldn't get out. No matter how much Nell and Alice jumped in that icy stream and kept cranking the front of the car to start turning the engine over, they were stuck. So they spent the whole night there. They opened up that trunk and got all of their blankets and coats, their winter boots, and they ate chocolate for dinner. And that's when the kitty kept them warm as well. Looks like 2 mules pulled them out the next day. I forgot to mention that. In Virginia, they passed a school and all the children ran to see the little yellow car. A car in our town and 2 women driving it? And can we hold the kitty? They said. The women were explaining how women should have the right to vote, and the kids wanted to look at the car too. As they drove away, the kids cheered, "Votes for women!" They went down North Carolina, down to Florida, passing fields and singing birds and butterflies. They also decided if they got to a mud puddle, they would stick a big stick or an umbrella down to see how deep it was before they went in at this time. They sometimes got stuck in clay and mud and sand, but sometimes they went to beautiful parties where women all wore yellow and had yellow things, yellow cake and bananas and pineapple and everything yellow, because that was the suffrage color. Yellow, white, and purple, actually. In Georgia, they joined a circus parade. Look at all the yellow. They got to the end of the parade and everybody cheered, "Votes for women," you're right. In Alabama, they sipped tea and nibbled on stuffed dates. Outside Gulfport, Mississippi, the little yellow car broke down and they didn't know how to get the car fixed. Finally, some men helped them fix the car, but they took the train into the next town. And nowhere in any of the newspapers does it explain, well, how did they get the car there? They had money given to people, so finally they got to stay in a nice hotel. And it was wonderful to have their own room. And they had to sneak the kitty into the hotel because they did not allow pets. Well, there were times where they had to dodge bullets at the Rio Grande River down by Texas because someone saw them on their property and decided to scare them off. Now, they didn't shoot at them, but up in the air to scare them away. They drove through the desert of New Mexico where they saw salamanders and Gila monsters, and they got lost for days in Arizona because they didn't have rest stops and gas stations. They had to ask people at country homes, where's the next road to here? Finally, they reached California. Oh my gosh, it was so exciting to get to San Francisco where they were at a very big parade. It was the World's Fair, actually. And it was the first time that they had a Ferris wheel. Well, here's the map that shows they started from New York in the blue line all the way down through Texas. Arizona, New Mexico to California, and then they went all the way up to Oregon and Washington. They never got to Seattle. They went across to the center part and stopped in Spokane, eastern Washington. Across Idaho, Montana, and all the way back to New York. 10,000 miles. Where did they sleep? Sometimes hotels, sometimes in people's barns in their hay with some soft blankets, oftentimes next to wood stoves in the winter, next to people's wood stoves in their homes. On September 30th, 1916, the little yellow car finally drove into New York City. People knew all about it. It had been in all the newspapers across the country. This car, though, carried mud now and dust and signatures, notes from people saying, yes, we agree, women should have the right to vote. Souvenirs from all around America. 2 smiling and sunburned women. Of course, back then they didn't have sunscreen. And a full-grown cat. Yay, the kitty made it. They arrived to a grand welcome. And what did people cheer? Votes for women. You got it. And they had a big yellow cake. The cat ate 7 slices of cake as reported in the New York Tribune. Would your kitty eat a cake piece? Well, after 10,000 bumpy miles, unmapped, they didn't know where they were going, but they made it. Nell said she was ready for a rest. And Alice, what do you think Alice decided to do? Well, she turned right around and crossed the country again. But this time, she took the train. And that's the end of the story. Finds information of when cars came out and how the story got told. So I hope you enjoyed Around America to Win the Vote. Thank you.